Hey everyone. Today I have another dinner recipe for you. So I'm going to be making some teriyaki meatballs, and I'm going to serve them with rice and a vegetable, and you can again serve them as you want, but make it your own. We'll talk through some other options. This is a great recipe because again, it's versatile, it's fairly simple. You do need some pantry ingredients, but we'll walk through those. And I think it's really tasty, it's family friendly. This week I've been having a hard time coming up with dinner ideas. I find that some weeks I have all this inspiration ideas, and other weeks it's like, oh my gosh, I can think of like one thing that my family seems to like to eat for dinner. So if that happens to you, just know that that's really normal. It's normal to cycle through that, and hopefully this recipe gives you one more idea to give a try. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to start by getting my rice cooked. However you like to cook rice is perfectly fine. Um, I have a rice cooker, and it's one of my favorite tools in the kitchen. And I'm not someone who likes a lot of different equipment in the kitchen. I don't have an air fryer. I don't have a big blender. I like to keep it simple, but my rice cooker I use a lot, and I just find it's really reliable. So this is the pan that goes in the rice cooker, and I'm doing 1 cup of rice. This is a brown rice I'm using today. Sometimes I do brown, sometimes I do white. So 1 part rice to 2 cups of water. I've heard mixed reviews on whether you should rinse rice or not. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I haven't done a science experiment to find out which is really the best. Today I'm not rinsing it. It's going to be fine. I think whatever you want to do is probably perfectly fine. All right, so 1 part rice, 2 parts water. It goes right in the rice cooker. And I just plug it in first, and then press this button here, and it just pops up when it's done. It's very reliable. So I love that. I love how simple it is. Okay, so let's get on to these meatballs. So for the meatballs, we're going to start with 1 egg. I like to mix all the ingredients except the meat in the bowl first and then add the meat. It just seems easier to get it mixed well. And 1/2 cup of breadcrumbs. I realized as I was prepping for this, that I didn't have a carton of panko breadcrumbs that I usually have on hand. So I had some bread that was kind of going stale. I stuck it in the toaster and toasted up a little more and put it in the food processor. So I've got 1/2 cup of breadcrumbs. They're not perfectly dried out, but they're going to be fine. You can also crush up crackers. You could use oatmeal. Sometimes that's in a recipe like this. So you can kind of get creative with what you use. I do prefer panko breadcrumbs over regular breadcrumbs when you buy them in the carton. And the reason is, look at the ingredients labels. The ingredients label on a regular breadcrumbs is like 100 ingredients long. There seems to be a lot of things preserving it. Panko breadcrumbs is really just kind of bread. It's very, very simple. So that's why I tend to gravitate toward those. All right, next thing we need is garlic. So you could use cloves of garlic that you mince up, or you can use garlic powder. I'm going to use garlic powder. And again, if you watched me before, I limit garlic just based on personal tolerance, but the amount will be in the recipe. It's either 1 to 2 cloves or 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. And our next ingredient is going to be ginger. So teaspoon of fresh ginger or 1/2 teaspoon of ground ginger. And I'm going to grab my ginger out of the freezer. I want to show you the product I've been using lately. I do have fresh ginger, and I enjoy using that when I have the time and want to chop it up. But these are these little cubes of ginger that come in the frozen food section at your grocery store, and you just pop one out when you need it. So actually, I'm going to save these for the sauce because a frozen cube in this is not going to work well right now unless I defrost it, and it will cook down in the sauce. And for this, I'll just use powdered ginger. So we need 1/2 teaspoon. All right, and 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. You'll notice kind of some Asian-inspired ingredients going in here. And choosing the reduced sodium soy sauce is a good practice. Again, it's still quite salty, but it's going to be less salty than the regular. And I find the taste to be quite similar. Okay, and then if you have sesame oil in your house, a teaspoon of sesame oil. I've recently run out of it and haven't restocked, so I'm going to leave it out. Again, it'll add a nice complement of flavor, but it's not essential if you don't have it. No need to go out and buy it. And then quarter teaspoon of black pepper. All right, and then mix this up. Kind of start softening up those breadcrumbs. And then we will get a pound of ground meat. So either ground chicken or ground turkey are going to be your primary options here, but you could make this with a lean ground beef. Ooh, sorry, that was really loud. You could make it with lean ground beef. It might work with a venison as well. I'm going to try not to touch this with my hands. Options for mixing this up. So some people like to wash their hands and use their hands to make meatballs. If you're comfortable with that, go for it. It is often a tactic that I use as well. Some people like to put on plastic gloves. Just make sure your gloves don't have any coating or anything on them that's going to get into the food. But that can be, if they're kind of food safe gloves, that can be a nice way to mix this up well. Hands really do mix it nicely. I'm going to use the fork today. It just feels like it's a little more video friendly than sticking my hands in here. Just make sure if you are using your hands that you're washing them really well with soap and water before and after, and take your rings off. You don't need any rings falling off in the meatballs. All right, just again, our goal, you don't want to overmix because it will kind of impact the texture of the meat here, but you want to make sure all those kind of clumps of breadiness are distributed evenly. It doesn't take too long. All right. That looks pretty good. Okay. My oven needs to be preheated to 400. And then I'm using a baking sheet with a piece of parchment paper on it. This really helps making cleanup easier. You could use tinfoil if you don't have parchment. And then if you don't have either, you can just use a plain old baking sheet. Again, it'll just require a little more cleanup when you're done. All right, so forming the balls. Again, here I do think that hands are the best way to go. There's probably like some fancy scoop out there you can buy to make meatballs, but hands feel like the best way to go for me, and actually having them a little bit wet can be helpful for the meat not sticking. Okay, so you're just going to take kind of a 2 tablespoon amount there, the size that you want for meatball, and roll some meatballs. Now, if you're a person that lives alone or lives just with one other in a small household, you might not need a full tray of these. You could just cut the recipe in half and then save your other half a pound of meat, just because they're usually sold as a pound, freeze it and save it for another recipe. Or you could make all these meatballs and then freeze them once they are cooked, and then take them out as you need them. I definitely use that tactic, and it's really nice to have cooked meatballs in the freezer so that when you need them, you've got a quick meal. I think I would keep the sauce separate when I'm freezing them. That would probably be my go-to, would be to freeze the meatballs on their own and then kind of sauce them when you're ready. And then in terms of how else we're going to serve this, so I'm going to roast some Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts were just on sale at the grocery store this week, so I picked them up, like to get them every once in a while. And I just like to roast them with some olive oil, salt, and pepper at about 425. They probably take about 25 minutes, maybe 20. They don't take too long. So that'll be what I put on the side, but you could do any vegetable would go with this. I would say some steamed, roasted, and sauteed broccoli, asparagus, green beans, any kind of I feel like a green vegetable would work nicely with this meal. All right, this should fit on one baking sheet. And so these are going to bake at 400 for about 15 to 18 minutes. I would highly recommend a meat thermometer to make sure that they've reached at least 165. My hands are getting a little sticky, so I'm going to give them another rinse here. I don't need a full wash. They're going back in the meat, but I wanted them a little wet again. That's going to help just them not stick to the meat. But yeah, 15 to 18 minutes, and then temp them. Usually that's plenty of time, fine with this small size. If you don't have a meat thermometer, it's one of the best tools you can get in the kitchen for food safety, but also just kind of good quality cooking, especially for meat. You can make sure you're not overcooking it by having that temp available, and then of course making sure you're not undercooking it from a safety perspective. All right, try to make your meatballs about the same size. If they're not exact, that's perfectly fine. If you kind of go on the small side, probably 15 minutes is going to be closer to your timing than not. All right, now that I am done touching meat, I want to do a full hand wash. All right, so these are going to go into the oven for about 18 minutes. All right, so while our meatballs are cooking, let's get the sauce made. So this teriyaki sauce calls for 1/3 cup of soy sauce. Again, it uses similar ingredients to some that we put in the meatballs, so you might already have some things out. Teriyaki sauce is a fairly salty sauce, so if you're someone who's very sensitive to your salt intake, you could either cut this down a little more and kind of balance the water a little more heavily, or find a more low sodium sauce option that you want to use. Okay, and then 1/3 cup of water. The other thing too, you could, I mean, we're going to kind of coat the meatballs in this sauce, but you could also take the sauce and just drizzle it over the meatball to use less if that works best for you. Okay, so 1/3 cup of soy sauce and water. And now the recipe calls for 2 to 3 tablespoons of honey or brown sugar. Or if you don't have either of those, feel free to use white sugar. I'm going to use 2 tablespoons this time. I tried it with 3 last time. Everyone in my family said it was great. I thought it was a little sweet, but I am kind of personally sensitive to things being overly sweet. It just doesn't taste as good to me. So I'm going to go with 2 and see how it is. But again, there's a range here, so you can always start with 2 and add a little more to the end if it doesn't feel sweet enough to you. Okay, so I've got 2 tablespoons of honey in there. And then a tablespoon of rice vinegar. If rice vinegar is not something you have on hand, this is quite common in kind of Asian cooking. I use it in my stir fries. You could use a regular, just a white vinegar. I'd probably only use half the amount though. It's a little stronger than this. And then again, there's a teaspoon of sesame oil in here, optional if you have it. I'm out of it right now, so I'm going to leave it out. It's fine either way. And then this is where we call for another 1 to 2 teaspoons of fresh ginger, and that's where I'm going to use these little cubes that pop out. So I'm going to use 1 teaspoon. I personally would probably like 2, but some people in my family don't like things too gingery, so I'll go with 1 today. And then again, 2 more cloves of garlic or garlic powder, if that's your preference. Okay, so I'm going to start heating this up. And now we need to make a cornstarch slurry. So this is what's going to help thicken our sauce here. You could probably just put the cornstarch in here and whisk it up. Cornstarch needs to go into a cold liquid to help it dissolve and not be chunky. I'm just going to mix it with water here just to be extra safe. So I got a tablespoon of cornstarch in my dish and 2 tablespoons of cold water. And then you just mix that around. This is going to be our thickener. So fairly simple sauce here. And it doesn't take long to cook. Basically, we want to bring it up to a simmer, then add the cornstarch. Once this simmers, it's going to thicken it right up, and then it'll be done. Now, 2 options. If you see this picture of this recipe and you think that looks delicious and I am crunched for time right now, 2 options. 1, you can buy meatballs, right? There's a variety of different meatballs out there. There's turkey meatballs, there's regular meatballs. So you could do that. I don't know that I've seen an kind of Asian flavored meatball out there, but there probably are, maybe just not at my grocery store. So buy the meatballs, make the sauce, or even buy a bottled teriyaki sauce. Oftentimes the bottled ones won't be thick, so you could thicken it with a little cornstarch, or you could just drizzle it over a regular meatball and kind of serve the meatballs, rice, and vegetable with that teriyaki flavor. So there's options to this, right? I think, again, when there's time, homemade is going to be our most enjoyable, flavorful, maybe nutritious option, but real life happens and we want to be able to cook for reality and busy schedules and things like that. So oftentimes I'm going to be giving ideas here and just offering you modifications on ways to make them your own. Okay, I need a whisk. All right, we are already up to a simmer here, and I'm just going to drizzle in my cornstarch slurry. Sorry, I don't have a great view for you, but really this will start to thicken up fairly quickly once it starts to simmer. I'll get a clear bowl to pour it in so you can see. So I would say I'm kind of like lightly thickened. It's not super thick. If you want it thicker, you could definitely add another tablespoon of cornstarch, maybe even a half a tablespoon. It'll thicken a little bit more as it cools, but I'll kind of show you where we're at right now. It's kind of like maple syrup thickness. If you wanted closer to a kind of honey thickness, you could add a little bit more. But once it gets on those meatballs, it still will be quite saucy. It smells teriyaki. It smells delicious. All right, I'm going to hold my sauce until the meatballs are done, and then we'll get them all mixed together. So my meatballs just came out of the oven, and they did take the full 18 minutes, and I've got my meat thermometer here. I do really like these digital options. And just stick it in the center of a couple of meatballs. I already did this, and they were all at about 168 to 170. Again, they need to be over 165. So that is our goal. All right, and so if you want to save on bowls, keeping your teriyaki sauce just in the pan it's in, if that can accommodate all your meatballs, can be a nice option there. Or if you want to put the meatballs in a bowl like this and then mix the sauce in, you can do that. You could mix it on the tray. Really, whatever you want to do is going to be fine. I think many of us are often thinking about how can I reduce the amount of dishes I'm using. So this can be a nice option to use the pan you already used. Again, if you want to freeze some of these meatballs without the sauce, I would just leave some of them out to cool. And once they are fully cool, put them in a Ziploc or a sealed container and then freeze them that way. Okay, so I'm going to then drizzle my sauce on here. I'm actually going to keep a little bit of the sauce reserved. I feel like I don't need quite all of it. And then just kind of gently toss the meatballs in the sauce. It smells delicious. They look delicious. All right, and I'm just going to let these kind of sit here. You could serve them right away and eat them, but my rice is still cooking and my Brussels sprouts are still roasting. And so once those come out, I will serve it up and show you what we've got. All right, everything is out of the oven or the rice cooker and we're ready to serve this up. So my rice here, the pan's still kind of hot, but I haven't done anything to it. Just the little lever popped up telling me it's done. And so sometimes your rice on the bottom, it will get a little stuck to the pan. If that happens, just take maybe a quarter cup or even a little less of water and drizzle it over and let that water sink to the bottom. It softens up the crispiness on the bottom and makes it all nice and tender. So that didn't happen to me today, so I've just got my plain rice. This rice doesn't have any seasonings added to it, so I'm just going to give it a little drizzle with olive oil and just a little pinch of salt. Sometimes I'll put a little butter on our rice. The kids especially like that, but a little olive oil works as well. So just to add a little texture and flavor here. Okay, and then I've got my roasted Brussels sprouts in here. You'll notice they're all nice and crisp up. And you'll get these like little pieces that are the leaves that come off that get extra crispy. They're actually really delicious, so give those a try if you've never tried them. Those look delicious. So let's serve a plate here. Got our rice. Make sure you get some of that sauciness in the bottom for these meatballs. And whatever vegetable you want. If this was some frozen broccoli, perfectly fine. Do what your family enjoys, do what you like. And then I've got a little extra sauce for drizzling on the top here. That would be nice. Also give a little added flavor for those Brussels sprouts and that rice. And then I didn't have sesame oil in the recipe, but I did find that I had this little package of sesame seeds. And so I was thinking a little sprinkle of sesame seeds over the top. One would be pretty, but would add that nice sesame flavor as well. All right, so there we have our teriyaki meatballs with brown rice and whatever veggie you like. If you like a little hot sauce, that would be delicious on here. If you like some chopped up green onions, that would be good on here. You can kind of make it your own in terms of added flavors, but this alone will be delicious. This meal preps really well, so you could make this and make kind of 4 meals out of it and have dinners or lunches, whatever works for you. But I hope you give it a try.